Well, welcome back to the Cinema of Transformation. This week we will be discussing Casablanca, and we're actually going to take 2 weeks on this film because there's a very strong outer story and a very intense inner story. So what I've done is sort of dissected them, which was kind of a bad thing to do because this movie intertwines them so expertly, and it's really part of what makes this movie interesting. But because it is so loaded, there's a lot of information. There's a lot to talk about. I really didn't think it would fit into 1 week. So we are pulling out as much as we can the outer story of Casablanca. And we're going to look at this movie as an allegory, a story that tells another story. And this is a story about an American who runs a bar in French-held Morocco in the city of Casablanca in the early 1940s. 1940, 1941 is about when this takes place. And this is an allegory for World War II at that time. Now, this is before the Americans got involved. And this has everything to do with America remaining neutral, because Rick, in this movie, in the allegory of this movie, is America. So we have Germans, we have the French, we have the Free French and the Vichy French. And we have refugees from all over Europe trying to get to Casablanca because it's a way station. It's a place where people can get out. They can get to Lisbon, to Portugal. And then from there, they can hopefully get on to America or Canada, wherever they're going, to escape the tyranny of the Nazis at this time in World War II. And because there's a war going on, and there are different sides to the war, there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of shifting allegiances. Sometimes you don't know who is on what side, and often people change sides or change back. So we're going to follow this, at least as it involves the outer story. And the largest part, really thematically, of the outer story is this notion of freedom over tyranny. So we have this country, Morocco, which is a French colony, which really doesn't speak of freedom, but they're not really occupied by the Germans. Now, the Germans are involved, but they haven't occupied it like they have Poland and other areas in Europe, even half of France, by this time. And I think the movie actually takes place in 1941, although the original play was written for 1940. So let's move on to Casablanca. 1942 is when it came out. America had entered the war by then, but the time frame of the movie is 1941, before Pearl Harbor. So this is when America was still on the fence, but the movie itself was based on a play called Everybody Comes to Rick's, and that line is used in the movie. I'm sure you'll hear it. And it was written by a couple who were in Casablanca, and they went to a bar and they kind of saw all this. There was a black piano player named Sam and all this stuff, and they kind of fabricated or threaded in, this other story about the letters of transit that we're going to see. But that got optioned by Warner Brothers, and they made it into a movie that won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay. And even though it won Best Screenplay, the couple who wrote the original play really didn't get much credit or confirmation for that, although they are credited. And the context of the movie, this is within the movie, as well as at that time happening in the world. Like I said, it was before America's involvement, so it was before Pearl Harbor got bombed. America was isolated. We were practicing a thing called isolation. We were practicing isolation at the time. That was a term, kind of loosely brought about by the American First movement. Charles Lindbergh was involved with that. Even President Roosevelt, in his 1940 election campaign, one of the things that he said over and over again is, "I'm not going to send our boys to war," which, whether that was a lie or not at the time, who knows? There's evidence that we were maneuvering. We just needed the public opinion that really wasn't on board at the time. Of course, that got dramatically changed when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And on the French side, we have basically two factions. We have the Vichy French, and they were a little sympathetic, aligned, at least cooperative to a degree, with the Nazis. One of the things is when the Germans came in to France in 1940, there was a lot of fear that if there was a really strong fighting resistance from the French and the Allies, that it would lead to so much destruction, so much of the culture, and so much death to the people of France that they surrendered fairly quickly. And probably a good thing, because the buildings and the culture and the people, at least a lot of them anyway, did survive, which otherwise might not have. But there's always a resistance. There's always an underground. And we have the Free French forces, sometimes called Free France. And this was led by General Charles de Gaulle, who later, after the liberation of France from the Allies, became the leader of France. And I do believe at least one of the airports near Paris is still called de Gaulle Airport. And you can see on this graphic here, there's a cross with two horizontal lines, kind of like a double cross, if you want to look at it like that. And that was the symbol of the Free French. And if you kind of look at it and squint your eyes, you can see two Fs, one facing one way, one facing the other way. So this was a symbol used by them. Now, let's look at the hero, Rick Blaine. This is Rick. He is America in this movie, according to the allegory. And in the movie, he is a provider. He has this bar. He wants to provide good entertainment and good employment for the employees. He's very loyal to his employees. But he's a loner, and he's neutral. There's even a line where he says, your business is politics. Mine is running a saloon. I'm staying out of it. He even said, I stick my neck out for nobody. He reaffirms this early on. But not everybody believes that. He has become this way, has become cynical, he's become isolated, where he used to was very involved previously to this. And we'll see how and why that happened and where he goes from that. And even though he's in a position to help, he really doesn't want to. He has these wounds from the past. And maybe with this allegory that we're talking about, maybe that's America wounded from the past, from World War I. We became involved with another war between France and Germany, and English troops were involved as well on the Allied side. And we got involved in this war, World War I. It was called the Great War then, and it was hailed by our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, that it was the war to end all wars. So we did get involved, and we did fight in World War I, and the Allies won. But it didn't end all wars, because guess what? We're back in war again, and now it's just World War I, and this is World War II. So America really doesn't want to get involved in this again, and for obvious reasons. But we find out through Louis that he always has this underdog interest, that he might fight for the losing side, but fight for ideals. And we see that through this, he is able to break through his past wounds and once again join the fight against tyranny. Now, the lover, we're going to talk about much more next week in the inner story, because that has everything to do with the love story. But she represents more than just a physical lover, as she was Rick's ex-girlfriend. But the beloved, that which is good, that which is free, that which is beautiful, that which you fight for in a war. You want the women and the children and, the future, really, of your culture, your country, to survive in a war. But she's really the bulk of Rick's past pain. They had a very bad breakup, and again, like I said, we'll get to that next week, and you'll see it in the movie as well. And she ends up being Laszlo's wife, and she is very protective of him, and she definitely supports the Free French movement. Now, freedom in itself is really what the beloved is for everyone in Casablanca. As a matter of fact, Casablanca, that's where people go to get out. It's, like I said, it's a way station. So everyone there, first of all, doesn't want to be there. They want to be somewhere else. They want to be free. But if this is the way to get there, that's how they go. And everyone wants to leave. Everyone wants to be free, except, well, of course, for the Nazis who want everybody to stay there and be under their rule. So that's Ilsa Lund. And complex character, very interesting. And in this outer story, we're really just going to look at what she represents, not so much who she is and their love story. We got a lot to talk about that next week. Okay, so Victor Laszlo, he is a leader of the Free French movement. And he is an ally for freedom, but he's also an opponent in a way to Rick because they both love the same girl. And this plays out back and forth, again, with this shifting loyalty that we see throughout it. The Germans want to capture him. They want to arrest him. They want to make sure that he doesn't leave Casablanca. And then as things progress, they also think that maybe it's not such a good idea if he stays in Casablanca because he's a bit of a troublemaker. And like I said, he's married to Ilsa. Now, there's a secret marriage for both their protection. If the authorities found out that Ilsa Lund is the wife to Victor Laszlo, then they would capture her and use her, obviously, to get to him. But we find out really early in the movie that when Victor is first mentioned by Louis to Rick, Rick he's impressed. Victor Laszlo, wow. Just the mention of his name really brought up something within Rick. So Rick's loyalties and, well, at least his connection to the forces of freedom really betray his non-intervention, isolation, stick my neck out for no one attitude that he is really showing on the outside. On the inside, this still impresses him. This still moves him in some way in his soul. And Victor just, not that he's one-dimensional, but he's really all about freedom and protection. But he's also willing to to risk getting captured, even sacrifice himself to some degree for Ilsa's safety. So he's unselfish, even though he's very, very dedicated toward the fight for freedom as well as the love of Ilsa. Okay, now one of the more interesting characters, this is the Trickster, Louis Renault. He is the French prefect of police in Casablanca. That's the local authority. So in that way, he's similar to the Germans. He says early on that he goes with the prevailing wind, that his loyalties shift with the tides. And at this point, at the beginning, he is aligned with the Vichy government, which is sympathetic, or like I said, at least cooperative, with the Nazis for obvious reasons. But he's also the gatekeeper. He is the one that has to sign the letters of transit. So anybody who wants to leave Casablanca really has to go through him and his office. And we see his shifting loyalty throughout. And sometimes we don't know. And that's a good thing because that shifting loyalty actually can be an advantage. And Rick uses that to his advantage. And we also see that just on a personal thing with Louis, that he's very interested in women and seems to be a little more of a lover than a fighter. And he's also a gambler too. And that's Louis. We'll get to know a lot more about him as we go through. Now, an obvious opponent in Casablanca is Major Strasser, and he is the German authority that has come to Casablanca because of one of the major plot things at the beginning, where these stolen letters of transit, 2 German couriers were murdered to acquire them. So he's there to make sure that the letters get back, the people who did this were brought to justice and everything. So he's kind of brought in a little bit in an emergency mode to make sure that things are on the up and up in Casablanca. And as a person, he is somebody who represents the whole Nazi oppression and occupation that's going through Europe. But we have it all kind of rolled up into this one person, Major Strasser. And like I said, he wants the stolen letters back. And he, very early on, as soon as he meets Rick, he warns him not to help Laszlo escape. Why he thought Rick might help, I don't know. But he has his reasons, and we see this unfold in the movie. Now, Sam, the piano player, is probably one of the greatest allies that Sam has stuck with them when they were in Paris, when they had to leave, and they made it to Casablanca. Incredibly loyal. And Rick shows his loyalty to Sam as well, several times in the film. And since he has been with Rick for a while, probably quite a while, he was there when Rick and Ilsa were together, so he knows all about what went down. So he's loyal on the surface as a person, as an employee, but he's also loyal as a friend who is there to protect or at least be there for Rick's heart as well. And the bar itself, Rick's Cafe Americain, is kind of an ally too. I mean, this is the place where people come to get out of Casablanca. And he is, very with the employees, everybody that comes in, he is loyal to the customers. He is very loyal and very supportive of his employees, especially in a place that really has kind of a low value on human life at that time in Casablanca. He places a very high value on the people that he works with at the bar. So in a way, the cafe is also another ally. It's kind of this safe haven, and it's also his sanctuary. Okay, now these letters of transit in the outer story are really the major plot point, the major plot element. We see at the beginning that Rick gets the letters from Agardie, who had actually killed the German couriers to get them. Now, they're very special letters, and this is why they become so important. They are signed by Charles de Gaulle. They need no other authority or any other signature. Certainly, they don't need one by Louis Renault in Casablanca to get out of there. And they are blank. The names of the travelers have not been filled in. So they are signed and sealed and stamped, completely official, cannot be rescinded, but they're also blank. So this is like a wild card, like a winning lotto ticket or something for somebody trying to get out of Casablanca. So they are incredibly valuable, and other people are willing to kill or die to get them. That's how important they are. And then after Rick gets them, he was only really supposed to hold on to them for a few hours for Agardie, but he gets killed, so Rick is now stuck with these letters, and that's what the rest of the drama unfolding is. What's he going to do with them? Who's going to get them? Whose names is he going to write in? There's only two of them. So we have this three-way relationship between Victor, Rick, and Ilsa, but only two names can go on the visas. So that's a recurring question that happens throughout. Now, here's just an interesting thing from the art department, I guess, or probably the director too, in this movie. The scope of the movie takes place over 3 days, basically, and nights. And the first night, when Strasser shows up, he and Louis are both wearing white. The whole atmosphere is generally pretty cordial, and everyone's polite, at least on the surface. Even when Strasser meets Victor Laszlo, they are at least surface, conversationally polite. They don't hide their true feelings, but there isn't really so much drama interesting, so they're wearing white. Next night, and this is the night when things all go south, the bar gets closed down, it turns into a disaster. The environment, the attitude is much more hostile. And on this second night, they're both wearing black. So kind of an interesting thing, but it kind of shows that maybe things really aren't black and white. They're black one night and white the other night. And then a whole bunch of shades of gray in between as we see and go along. Now, the main story is really, I believe, the inner story. So when we look at the outer story, we have to look at the hero's journey perhaps a little bit differently, although it happens chronologically in the same way. And if there is a call, this call to adventure is whether or not Rick is going to help Laszlo escape. And the letters fall into his possession. And Louis seemed, even though this is even before he knows that Rick has the letters, Louis seems to think that Rick may help Laszlo escape, and they have a wager. And Rick bets that Laszlo will escape. Louis bets that Laszlo won't escape, regardless of who helps who. But at this time, earlier on, Rick is still neutral. He says, why would I want to get involved? And Louis tells him why he would want to get involved. So even though he didn't call out to this adventure, it sort of fell in his lap. There's a little bit of circumstance or fate, because it all showed up into his bar. The letters, Ilsa, Laszlo, Major Strasser, it all comes to him. Maybe much in the way this call to adventure for America in 1940, 1941. It's the call to war, if you want to call that an adventure. Denies it at first, refuses it at first, and then picks it up as we go along. Now, there's a great scene, and I want you to watch the clip that I have in the resources section, where the Germans, this is the second night they're wearing black, the Germans show up, and they're hanging around Sam's piano, and they're playing a very patriotic German song, and about the Vaterland and everything. And then this really upsets Laszlo. So he gets out there and convinces the band to start playing the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, and he does, and it's a fantastic scene. Watch it several times, please. I love it. It shows the loyalty, the patriotism, really where people's hearts are. And this is the catalyzing moment that really solidifies where people fall. There's some of this ambiguity and shifting loyalty really gets clarified in this scene, especially at the end. So that's Laszlo. That's the bar gets shut down right after that. So that's a little bit of death coming on. Matter of fact, this whole movie is really the whole thing is an appointment with death. There's just constant danger. Everyone's going to get killed. Could get killed. Might get killed. Might kill. Who knows? There's just really death is sort of surrounding this whole environment because it's really volatile and there's a war going on. And then also later that night, Victor goes off to one of the Free French meetings, and Ilsa returns to Rick's, and she tries to convince him, pleads him, begs him for those letters of transit, because by then everybody knows that Rick has them, and then there's only two of them. So she wants them. She really wants them, even threatens to kill him, pulls a gun on him. So there's a lot of guns being pulled on people throughout this too, and there's a lot of death. So, but this is in the hero's journey at about the same place where it usually occurs, this appointment with death, and we see that. And then at the end, we get to the airport. This is the third day or the third night. And Rick decides, whether he decided then or he had decided beforehand, we don't know, but it becomes clear that he's going to give the letters of transit to Ilsa and Victor. And this is where he now is involved. This is America getting involved somewhat in the war. At that time, we had the Lend-Lease program that we could sell in quotes, military machinery, ships, tanks, whatever, to the Allies, but they wouldn't have to pay us back until later. So it was a way of sort of getting involved. So this is like giving the letters to them. It's sort of helping, but you're not really directly involved, but you're providing assistance in some way. And there's a really great line that Victor gives to Rick after they're at the scene right here and they're saying goodbye. He turns to Rick and he says, "Welcome back to the fight. This time I know our side is going to win." And yes, this is in the movie. And yes, this is part of the allegory that America is now back into the fight. And yes, we are going to win. And as soon as the plane takes off, or as it's taking off, Major Strasser shows up and tries to stop it. And at this point, Rick shoots Strasser. He actually kills a German. This is an American killing a German, so that the French resistance movement leader can leave and escape. So this is, again, it sets up through this allegory that America is going to get involved. We're going to get involved with paperwork and military equipment, as well as a shooting war, risking our boys that FDR said we weren't going to do. So that's the point where we know how far Rick is willing to stick his neck out, actually to risk his life. So wow, that's a huge transformation from the beginning. And we see it all unfold. A lot of it has to do with his connection with Ilsa, where he becomes unconditional and unselfish with his love. And it also has to do with his spite for the Germans and his love of freedom and all that America stands for. So he went from being a cynic, isolationist, to somebody who is deeply involved with the cause. And after this, we see a new beginning. A lot of these movies we've been talking about end with a new beginning. That's a great way to end, because now that we've gone through this, now we can begin anew with what comes next. And we even see Louis' transformation. When Rick shows up, or when Strasser shows up to try to stop the plane from taking off, and Rick shoots him, then the French garrison shows up, and Louis says to them, "Major Strasser's been shot. Round up the usual suspects." He did not turn Rick in. And as you can see, and you'll maybe notice at the beginning of the film, this rounding up the usual suspects is a rule of threes. It gets mentioned twice before. One time at the very, very beginning, I think it's one of the first lines, after the narrator, there's a dispatcher that says the 2 German couriers have been shot, round up all suspicious characters. And then when Strasser comes to the airport to arrive in Casablanca and Louis is there to greet him, he says, "Oh, we've rounded up even twice the number of usual suspects and suspicious characters that they do." So we know that this usual suspects is kind of a ruse anyway. And we've not really paid much attention to that, although it's in our subconscious. That's the great way this rule of threes works, that we hear it once, we hear it again, and then we kind of forget about it. But when he says, "round up the usual suspects," we know, because we've heard that before, and that's Louis' shift. It could have gone either way. Actually, the play ends very differently than the movie. But he says, "round up the usual suspects," meaning that Rick is not one of the suspects, even though Rick did kill Strasser. And then he picks up a bottle of water, this Vichy water, and he won't drink it. He throws it in the trash. So we have seen in this one shot that Louis has gone from being loyal to the Vichy sympathetic government to now helping the Free French movement. And, of course, this new beginning is played out in an actual line of dialogue. It's the ending line of the movie. "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." And they walk off into the fog. Now, this, again, is the outer look at the outer story of Casablanca. Next week, we will look at the inner story, having everything to do with the love story. It's impossible to really separate them out, so maybe we're looking at 2 sides of a coin, okay, instead of 2 different movies here. I hope you've enjoyed. Listen to or watch the clips. And I guess I'll leave you with this, since Casablanca means White House. In Morocco, in Casablanca, we see this American who is a leader of a bar in Casablanca, going from being isolated to getting deeply involved in the European war, just as the allegory might point to the other person in another Casablanca or White House, the actual White House of President Roosevelt, who then did bring us into the war. So that's the allegory for World War II in a bar, Casablanca.